Well, Henson, I mean, the name Henson came later on. You know, the studio was originally owned by A&M Records, Herb Albert and Jerry Moss, who were the A and M in A&M Records. And when I recorded here in the early 90s, it was still owned by those gentlemen, and the label was right here on the lot. But the lot goes all the way back to Charlie Chaplin, which Charlie Chaplin, being the great film director and producer and actor, built the studio lot when there wasn't really much around here. You know, this was pretty open territory, and the studio made films here on the lot. So when I started working here, late 80s, early 90s, the studio was officially A&M Records, A&M Studios. And and the room that we're sitting in was probably most famous for We Are the World. You know, Michael Jackson, Quincy Jones put that together, and I believe that was mid 80s. They did that, you know, amazing track here with all these huge superstars that came in to sing on it for the world to hear and kind of find out about this particular studio. Um, and then when we came here to record with Guns N' Roses, we chose Studio A mainly for the space of it. And in those days, we recorded live. You know, the band was all set up in the studio. If you look behind me, the big room, it's pretty massive. You know, and they do full strings in there, and you can get a lot of people in there. But you know, we were spread out. We had the drum kit set up over against that wall, and then Slash and Duff and Izzy had a little room, and Izzy liked to hang out in the vocal booth over here. So we had Izzy in there, and then Axel's room was actually back behind those glass doors. Axel had a piano back there, and when I first joined the band, the amp room was the furthest down. It was behind this other sliding glass door, so all the amplifiers could go in there. You know, a lot of what went into making the record in those days for us was just the sheer enjoyment of playing music and being here in the environment that we created in the studio. You know, we'd work hard. You know, we'd come in at noon, which is, in my opinion, anything before noon for rock and roll is a little bit suspect. So we'd start around noon, and we, you know, get the coffee going and coming off the night before or whatever we had to do. But, you know, we would get out in the studio and cut a track, and then Mike Klink, the producer, would sit here at the console and instruct us in what to do next. And, you know, we recorded live in those days, so we cut to tape. There's really no click tracks to speak of. And, you know, we would do one or two takes, and then if it wasn't happening, we would maybe blow it off and do it another day. But in general, most of those records were recorded in 2 to 3 takes tops. And as Slash used to say to me, I would say, hey, what do you think about doing one more? And Slash would turn to me and say, you just want to suck the rock and roll right out of it, don't you? And I'd be like, okay, that makes perfect sense to me. You know, it wasn't about being perfect. It was about the spirit of it, you know, and the energy that went into the track. And sometimes I think that he felt for the music that we were making at the time, if it was being thought about too much, if the thought process went into recording, oh, I'm going to think about what I'm doing now, that took away from that sheer moment that we were creating, you know, around the music. And 99% of the time, 99.9% of the time, what you hear on those records was what went down together. You know, that was the push and pull of the music. There was no computers in those days, so it was about what we heard back at the moment. So we got the best sounds going in that we could. It wasn't about, like, you used to hear that old expression, oh, we'll fix it in the mix. Now they just fix fucking everything. So it's like, you know, we're just going to fix everything. But we just came in here, and this was our home. You know, we created an environment that made us want to be here and make music. And it was an amazing time. We recorded 35 songs in here. And I remember Axl Rose walked through that door right there, came through, and the little slider went open. There's a push button door here. It's a bit like Star Trek, beam me up, Scotty kind of shit. And the door would go, whoosh, and then in comes Axl. I probably had a headband on. I don't remember, but he's like, hello. And I remember when he said, we were all sitting here, and Axl said, we're going to record. We're going to put out all the songs. We're going to do a double album. Because when we came in to record Use Your Illusion 1 and 2, the intention was we were going to record all these songs and then make one great record, which a lot of bands do. They'll record 20, a lot of people don't know this, but bands will come in the studio, record 25, 30, who knows how many songs. And then they'll sit around and select the best, 12 or 13 pieces of music that are going to represent the next great record that they're working on trying to make, right? So when he said that, we were all like, oh my God, maybe going into some recordings, some of them, I didn't have I always try to give my 100% on everything, but there was a few that I was like, oh, this probably won't make the record, or I don't know if this is a great, you know what I mean? In myself, I never, as a band, we never really talked like that. We were always putting our best foot forward in the music, but there were certain songs. But we were kind of like, okay. And then Axl came up with this incredible idea. So in those days, if you remember, records were on vinyl. And then there was a thing called a cassette. It was a very bizarre looking little thing. And if you had a double album in those days, it went behind the cash register. So he had to go up to the gentleman at, say, a record store and say, I'd like to see that double album. Because if it was over $20 or whatever, they had to put it back there. So Axl goes, I know how I want to do this. I want to put 2 volumes of one record out with the same album cover in different colors, so it can be in the front bin where people would walk through the record store and be able to shuffle through the bin and hold the records and look at them. And I remember looking at him going, fucking guy's a genius. Yeah, it was fucking genius. It just was. Except for there was this other guy named Garth Brooks. And I remember when we opened the Billboard, top 10 of that week or top 40 or whatever the fuck, records came out, and Garth Brooks was number 1, and we were number 2 and 3. We're like, who the fuck is Garth Brooks? Fucking Garth Brooks. And then the next week, we entered the charts at number 1 and 2. But no one told us that this country guy named Garth Brooks was gonna. But that was really funny. But those records, that we made here at Use Your Illusion 1 and 2 gave us this amazing 3.5-year run out on the road. We were able to continue to put out videos, and we just stayed out on the road forever, which eventually practically killed us all. But it had a lot of legs, as they'd say in the music business. In those days, when you made a record, the idea was you go out and you promote the record, and you tour, and you play the songs, and you continue to release singles and like that. Making a good drum recording really, I've made great drum recordings in garages. I've made them in houses. I've made them in great studios. I think it goes a lot with the guy that's behind the board twiddling the knobs. I've been in some of the best studios in the world and had the guy twiddling the knobs that didn't really quite know how to twiddle, and the shit would just be crap. And then I've worked in very small studios with great engineers that are able to get really cool sounds and what you have to work with. And I think what happened here at A&M Studios, which is called HENSON now, was magic of the team that we put together. Mike Klink was the premier producer of the time. He knew how to capture the live element of a band on a recording and capture the essence and the attitude of the band and the musicians involved, right? So it wasn't like, I think a lot of times when you listen to music and you listen to a band or a great band like the Stones or Zeppelin or Queen or AC/DC or any of these great bands, I think somehow that studio or that moment in time and that producer captured the essence of that attitude that goes into playing the music, right? And when I came in here with Mike Klink, the first track I did with him here at A&M was Knocking on Heaven's Door. So we came in here to sort of try the room. And we did a track for this film called Days of Thunder, which Tom Cruise was the star. And I remember at the time, we hired a drum kit off J-Mo, who was Jeff Porcaro's drum tech, and he had a kit, and he came in, and it was all tuned up, and I sat down. It was a beautiful Gretsch kit, and we set it up, and Mike mic'd it really cool and baffled it, because the room's really big, so in A, we weren't really looking for a big room sound. We were looking for kind of a more tight, rock and roll in your face, punchy, so we baffled the drums off quite a bit. Didn't really use the entirety of the room for the drums, per se. Like, a lot of guys think, oh, we're going to get a big rock drum sound, but we're going to go to this massive room, and it's going to sound huge. And things got carried away with that in the 80s, mid-80s. Everyone was trying to, like, go and capture this Kashmir, John Bonham kind of thing, which, if you really listen to that, it's not a big room. It's John Bonham, and it's the way they mic the drums, and it goes with the other instruments. So something happened in the mid-'80s where everyone was like, big drum rooms, let's go record the drums in a swimming pool, and, microphones everywhere, and, and reverbs, and all these things started happening, to drums. And the thing about Guns N' Roses was there was more of a traditional rock band, is that we studied the bands that we were into and that we studied were the great bands that came before us. Like the Stones, Aerosmith, ZZ Top, Cheap Trick, all you name, I can name a list. And there was a punk element to it, so we loved early Pistols albums, Clash records, they were down and dirty. So when I came in here with Mike Klink and he started setting up the mics, I was always very interested in what he was running stuff through. So I became like the guy that knew the name of all the microphones. And what is that on the kick drum? That's a 47 Fat by Neumann, on the front head. And the typical SM57 microphone on the snare. And we used Sennheiser 421s on the toms, which we're using on this particular piece for Spitfire. I'm using that same identical tom mic. It looks like a big shaver, but it works really well with that big tom sound that we created. And I think the one thing I did get off those records was a pretty great tom sound that really represented who I was as the new drummer coming in to get GNR out of the first record. It became more of an epic album. And Axl wanted to make an epic record. He couldn't make the same record twice. We wanted to go forward. We wanted to move into a bigger arena, being an epic, meaning we're going to be an arena band, then we're going to play stadiums, then we're going to go, And I've said it to some bands, like, for instance, bands like Kings of Leon or The Strokes, bands like that I know those guys. And I saw them making these lo-fi records with lo-fi sounds. And then when Kings of Leon made an epic sounding record, all of a sudden they're in arenas. They're playing with U2. It was in Axl's mindset to make this grandiose piece of music. And at first, when I joined the band and the pianos were involved and the strings, I was like, whoa! I thought I was joining a 2-guitar, bass, and drum band. But then I understood, and we, for songs like November Rain and Don't Cry and Estranged, these big sort of epic pieces. Me and Axel sat, actually, I believe we were over there on the floor. We ordered some Russian caviar. We had a bottle of vodka. We sat here, me and Axel, late at night, and we listened to "Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me" by Elton John. And he was a huge Elton fan, you know. Oh, he loves Elton, and we were eating the caviar and drinking shots of vodka, and this big epic tom fill came by. Axel goes, "I want you to do that, something like that on November Rain. And I want you to mark every section with a signature musical fill that will just be representative of not only that song, but I want you to use it again as a little snippet in Don't Cry, and I want you to do it again in Estranged." I said, "You want me to do the same drum fill?" He said, "Yes." So I was like, okay. So I did the most famous fill that drummers give me shit for all the time. It's called the Pat Boone, Debbie Boone. And it goes, Pat Boone, Debbie Boone, right? And when I played that, Axel said, "I love that. And I want you to do it here, 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 and here." And then he sat in there on the piano, and I was out there. And we went around the cymbals, too. And he played notes on the piano. And when I go to this chord, I want you to hit that cymbal. And I hit it, and he thought he'd hear like a G note in it, and maybe there was a C, and the other cymbal. When I go to this chord, I want you to hit that cymbal. And so we worked out this whole thing, just me and him, and the rest of the band came in. You know, they were out doing whatever. And we had it all worked out. And then we recorded that piece of music, November Rain, and then Estranged was originally part of November Rain. It was segued into Estranged, and it was this huge 20-some minute epic thing, right? And we cut it in half and made it separate, but it was part of what he called the trilogy, which Don't Cry was included in that. So it all sort of was a story that went interspersed. And on that particular trilogy, I used this snare drum that's sort of become famous, and my tech and good buddy Mike Fasano had this drum, and we named it Big Red. And it was this birch deep drum, and it was the color of it was red, and it was a Tama. And we used that on all three of those tracks, and it had this real thumpy low end to it, and was just a great ballad thing. And when I did those records, I got really into snare drums, you know. It was like, I thought at the time it'd be really cool to experiment with different tonal things with the backbeat. You know, what should I use for this particular song that would speak? It wasn't about, a lot of drummers in rock bands have a signature snare drum sounds that just sort of play through the whole album, right? Like Alex Van Halen, if you hear his snare drum, you know it's Alex Van Halen. I kind of thought, well, I want to kind of take a different approach. And I don't want to say I used a different snare drum on every song, but I used probably 20 different snare drums, maybe a little bit more on those records. And there was this song called Locomotive, and I'd just gotten a hold of this really cool Noble and Cooley drum, which was kind of a little custom snare drum company up in upstate New York, I believe, on the East Coast. And it was this little white shell, 5-inch deep drum, and it just had the most killer crack sound to it. So I grabbed that, and as soon as I kicked into Locomotive, started with the drum fill, the band was like, "Wow, that's so cool. I love the sound of that." So we ended up using that, and then, you know, but the two probably most representative drums on those records is Big Red and then the Noble and Cooley drum, and I played with a lot of different things. You know, I kept the kit pretty similar. I used 3 rack toms on that album, and then when I play live, I only use 1 rack tom, like the way we're recording. But I had a little bit more to work with, you know? And then I messed with the cymbals depending on what I was doing sonically. Well, Mike knows me for what is it, 30 years now? You know what I mean? I mean, he knows me better than I know me, you know? It's like and he when you have somebody that is as good in the studio and has worked as many times in the studio as Mike has, like after that he started working for bands like Green Day and all these bands that were coming up, and he became like the go-to studio guy, and he collected amazing drums, and we would talk about all these cool drums that and I was collecting snare drums and he was collecting snare drums, and we was like, what the hell was that snare? Did you hear that? And he go, that's the Tom of Bell Brass, which was the famous drum that Dave Grohl used on Nevermind, and it became like this, the Holy Grail, right? And Black Beauties and Ludwig Black Beauties and then Gretsch drums and kick drums, and so it became this geek banter and cymbals, and so now our relationship is like that where I just don't even have to think about it. All I got to do is email Mike and go, bring the Gretsch kit, bring some snares, and I'm gonna go. Now I'm in playing K cymbals. In the old days, I played A cymbals. I played A Abita Siljan, and as I'm getting a little bit older and maybe a little bit more deaf. No, I don't know. No, I'm not deaf actually. I feel like I'm maturing in a way because things that didn't sound good to me when I was younger sound amazing to me now. I can't say why that is, or maybe I just wasn't ready for it at the time. But now I've changed a little bit in the way that I've almost gone back to like the 70s thing that I grew up listening to and loving, and I've been lately playing with everyone from Alice Cooper to Robin Zander to Billy Gibbons to Steven Tyler. All my heroes, I'm playing in bands with them now. I've got this thing I do called Kings of Chaos, and I also just joined Hollywood Vampires with Joe Perry. So it's always taken me full circle back to the original reason I became a drummer and the sounds that I'm trying to create again now. There was a period of time in the early 90s where drums got a little bit wacky as far as what was represented on albums, mid 80s to mid 90s. Drum sounds got a little bit fucked up by people thinking that's what they should sound like because it was an era and a time, right? So now I'm going back to my roots, if you will. So when I talk to Mike about the drums, he knows exactly what I'm talking about. And when I walked in yesterday and sat down on the drum kit, it was perfect. I don't have to do anything. And if it feels good and I sit down and it feels good, I think a lot of what happens with drummers or any great bass player or guitar player that I know, a lot of it's in the hands. It's a lot about how you play the drums and how you hit them. And everybody has a different sensibility. Abe Laboriel can come in here tomorrow and play that same kit and probably sound completely different because he's Abe or Josh or Chad Smith or any drummer that sits down is going to have their personality rolled into that sound of those drums, but it's going to sound somewhat different. I have a small studio at my house, and I have a small drum room, and I have a cool kit in there, and I get it sounding pretty good, but I haven't got this kind of a room. Like you go into Studio B, which we're going to go there in a minute, that is a fucking great drum room. Not to say that A isn't, but if I had my preference, I would probably record, which I did, the Cult Beyond Good and Evil album in B with Bob Rock. But then I've also worked in D with Brendan O'Brien, which I recorded the second Velvet Revolver album. And that's a great drum room as well. But I really like playing in there. It's got a nice compression to it that just hits you. It's not too big. So for someone to say, hey, I'm going to pull up these samples that Matt did at Studio B at HENSON / A&M Studios, where all these incredible records, I remember when Bob Dylan was over there, Iggy Pop, I guess Coldplay was just, all these bands that have been through there, hundreds, if you went down the list, of probably some of the greatest records on your playlist, that's pretty special. You can't just go, hey, I'm going to go out to my room and get that sound. It's never going to be there. It's never going to be the same. That room and those microphones that they have, I can't afford those microphones. They got microphones in there on the kit that are like, $10,000, $20,000 microphones, and they got like 10 of them up. A couple $100,000 worth of mics, right? And then all the outboard gear and all the other shit. And we're hitting tape. We're hitting a Studer tape machine. So you're going to have the library to be able to go in there and grab that. That's special stuff, I'm going to grab it for my own record. I am. Because I got my room. I go, I'll put some Studio B on there, man, hitting the brass snare drum. And I do a little like stuff underneath the drums in my little drum room, because I haven't got, like I say, the big drum room. So I'll add some kick underneath and give it some weight, which a lot of people are working in home studios. They're working in wherever they're working, and you'll be able to have this amazing library to go to grab all these beautiful sounds. It's so cool. I started talking to the Spitfire guys about the beats and what would be useful. Obviously, there's hundreds of thousands of beats I could have played, right? Maybe I haven't got 100,000 in my back pocket, but, a lot. And I thought, the style of drummer that I've been my whole career, I'm a rock drummer by definition of the word. People in the world know me as a rock drummer. So I went in and represented what I thought would be cool for a songwriter. If you got some kind of trippy beat that's kind of groovy and it's got like, you tend to write towards that beat, which will give you an idea of how to write a song, right? Maybe, possibly. But I went for a simple approach on the 90 BPM, the 120, and the 160. One, because there's a lot of things you can do with the real simplicity of it, right? When you go into bands like AC/DC, and simplicity of Phil Rudd's drumming on a lot of those records is bone straight. But there's a vast thing that can happen on top of that, musically, where it's not going, oh, that's taking me somewhere. So I went for real simple stuff on the different BPMs. Tight hi-hat, eighth notes, 1 and 3 kick, mixing it up with 1, 3 and, 1 and 3, opening up the hat, a few sneaky Pete's, what we call sneaky Pete, a little open up here if you want. You listen to some of the greatest 70s records, and you go, wow, listen to that sneaky Pete. Listen to where he put that. The simplicity of that. He didn't crash there, but he did a little sneaky Pete. Like that kind of shit. Subtle, simple, but very classic and cool. And then, opening up, going to the ride, then going up to the crash. So you have these things that you can do with really simple editing. And then within that, I played fills and different things that, from what I understand, the way you guys are going to lay it out, is you'll be able to grab these things. And you got flams, and you got ghost notes, and you can create whatever you want based in those building blocks, right? Which is so cool. And then, going through all the crashes, we got this beautiful array of Zildjian symbols that you'll be able to go through and pick and choose. Because, there's been many times when I've recorded and maybe I'll go, I kind of miss a crash there. I missed that one. Maybe we should add one there. Or I'll play it simple, and I want to go back. And you just go, bloop, throw that in there, and you got, you pick your sonic, right? And then I was also talking to you guys about the way to be able to lend the drums separately from the cymbals. There's so many things you could do sonically with compressors and create your own drum sound based on those samples. So you can start, fucking with the sounds, if you will. You can run them through distortion, you can compress them, you can fuck with them, and then leave the cymbals clean. So it's really a building block of what you want to make your thing based on these incredible sounds that have been in this classic studio, right? The consistency of that, but the other thing about consistency is I think what a lot of people miss when they're doing samples is drummers don't hit like that all the time, was my point, right? Even myself, there's going to be variance in the velocity. You can't just lay one sample across all the snare hits and expect it to sound like a human. So the way we created it with Spitfire is we've done all these separate hits. Go in there and make it feel right, man, because you have the tools, what we're providing. So you give it those ghost notes and give it that human feel, and maybe on the fourth hit down, take it down a notch. Don't have everything perfect. I think what we're doing here, and we're working hard doing it, is providing as many tools as possible to create great tracks based on the samples. And you're going to have a lot of different styles of guys. You know what I mean? I think, depending on what kind of music you're writing, So it's cool. It's very cool. I'm very honored to be a part of it.